This is Guided by Wellness with Dr. Magnus Thorsson, your source for clarity on the science of cannabis wellness.
Cannabis has changed. Once known for balanced flower with rich CBD profiles, today's market often chases high THC numbers as the main measure of value. But cannabis isn't just about potency. It's about experience, wellness, and culture. For James Moran, general manager of Newport Cannabis Company, that shift raises big questions. What have we gained since legalization, and what have we lost? And how should cannabis evolve to better serve customers? In this episode, James shares his opinion on how cannabis culture has shifted since the legacy market, the rise and risk of THC dominance, why terpenes and balance matter more than numbers, and how Rhode Island can build a cannabis culture rooted in clarity, lifestyle, and wellness. Today, we're asking what cannabis really is and what it should be. James Moran joins us to reflect on the industry past, critiques the present, and shares his vision for a future where cannabis is more about experience and less about chasing numbers. James Moran is the general manager of Newport Cannabis, one of Rhode Island's newest vertically integrated operators. He began his cannabis career at Hangar 420, where he helped lead the brand to statewide success. Having lived in the legacy to legal transition, James brings unique insight into how cannabis has evolved for better and for worse. So thank you for joining me on Guided by Wellness. I'm really excited to talk to you. I knew when I watched how excited my students were to hear you tell the story of how you got to cannabis that I had to have you on. So I first want to ask you, James, if you can introduce yourself and tell us what it is that you do and how you came to the cannabis industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. It was awesome talking to the class. But yeah, I'm currently the director of sales and marketing for Newport Cannabis Company. It's one of the 7 dispensaries in the state. And before that, I was the director of sales and marketing for Hangar 420, which was a Rhode Island cultivator. Cultivator is basically just a word for we only farmed and manufactured the plant. We couldn't sell it. So before that, we were just selling to the 7 dispensaries in the state. Yes, and before that, I sold weed from probably my freshman year of college up to when I started selling it legally in different forms with different breaks. So yeah, I found myself to the legal cannabis market, but a decade before, I found myself to kind of that legacy black market, which was really the only space cannabis existed. So, it's probably the job I've spent doing for the longest time in my life, which is pretty cool.
That is pretty good. And there's not a lot of stories of people who have been able to convert legacy work into the profession as you have. So it's quite impressive. So I'm interested in trying to sort of tease out what changes you've seen throughout your career, throughout your plant-touching career. And I wanted to see, so you've seen cannabis on both sides, both the legacy market and the regulated market. And how would you say the culture has shifted since we went to the legal market?
The culture has shifted entirely, really. There's pros and cons, I think, to all of it. The biggest change is there's probably less small-time, dealers like me back in the day where I'd pick up, 2 ounces, which is, barely a pound. It's, two out of 16 ounces to make up a full pound of weed. And yeah, it used to be a lot less checked. There were no checks and balances. It was, hit up your buddy Mike and get those 2 ounces and dub them out and try to sell it for as much as possible before, you or your friends smoked those 2 small baggies you had of it. So yeah, a lot has changed. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I was arrested for having an eighth in my own house. And I mean, now we're at the point where I'm selling over 70 to 100 pounds a month legally to the people on the same islet I was arrested. So, uh, the legacy culture might have changed, but it definitely has changed for the better in those regards in terms of, actually being able to make a career out of it and not worrying about going behind bars for a plant.
For a plant, for something that we now are well aware of has great medicinal and recreational benefits and properties. Do you feel that we've lost something in terms of the quality or the type of products since we went to the legal market?
It's hard to say specifically there because I think with regulation has probably stopped some of the quality, but at the end of the day, it's allowed for more consistent buying, I guess. In the legacy market, yeah, maybe you were smoking better flower that didn't care as much about THC numbers, and the growers were mom and pop or just people growing in their basements. But you could have a good dealer, you could have a bad dealer. You could have, the guy you liked buying from is arrested and gone for 2 years, and now you need to find your supply elsewhere. So, quality wise, it's hard to say exactly. I know what's more geared for in legal commercial grows, but at least you know what you're getting. Your favorite brand, your favorite dealer now isn't exactly going to go to jail, and you could always find it on the market. So it's kind of give and take, I guess, for the legacy.
Right, and yeah, let's hope that the legal market is not going to jail. But I mean, in terms of one of the things that we talk about in terms of the legal market is that, as you mentioned, the product is better regulated. It's measured now. You see what's in it, but and with greater accessibility, is there something that we've lost that the legacy market had? Was there?
I mean, you might have lost people who. It's a club you need a lot of money to enter. With the legal market, in terms of there's a lot of overhead that goes into this business. And I'm not just talking about the electricity and the water and payroll, but also just the price to have a license yearly, whether it's for a cultivator or for a dispensary. I mean, in our state of Rhode Island, if you have a dispensary, you have to pay $500,000 a year just to maintain your license. So with that kind of geared entryway has definitely probably stopped a lot of legacy and old dealers from entering the market because you just don't have the money to do the startup. Now social equity is a great way around that, but then you kind of go into, are these states doing social equity the right way, or are they just creating another barrier for the rich MSO companies to come in and just find someone who is an applicant for that social equity? So, I mean, I think the biggest thing is just not everyone can play in the legal sandbox. Where before that, if you had a room and some lights, you could sell weed.
It's sort of like we've turned to Walmart kind of weed. We've sort of structured it like classical retail, expensive to enter. I've heard, and at some of the conferences that I go to, I hear people talk about things like squirrel tail. They talk about the old land races that are now lost.
Without a doubt? I mean, so that's a big thing, and I think the biggest thing that the legal market does has put numbers on weed, where before that the only numbers were weights. Am I buying an eighth? Am I buying a gram? Am I buying an ounce? Am I buying a quap? But now the numbers are THC, and it's how messed up is this weed going to get me? And it's really before that, and it's something I say at events all the time. specifically geared to people my age or older who, were in that black market for a long time and having to wait on a corner for an hour because their dealer said, I'm going to be right there, and it's taking longer. There were no numbers on that Ziploc bag that your buddy was giving you. It was the smell, the look, the smoke, the effect, and what the legal market has done, somewhat out of necessity. They needed a barrier to sell things, and the THC has become that, the potency number. But it's not really the most accurate number due to a myriad of factors, whether it's bud structure, different states' testing varies. You can have one section of a package that is loaded with keef and the other isn't. And now weed that is really 20% because the sample has a lot of keef in it is now 30%. So they're not make-believe numbers. They are rooted in something, but it's not the full evaluation of the plant, but it's the only way that the consumer really evaluates it now. And that's changed. It's done a 180 since the black market, legacy market.
Right, and right, as you aptly point out, that we just didn't have the metrics back then, and it was just, you knew Mike grew a good bud, and you would get your bud from Mike, but that changes as you shift from one grower or from one dealer to the next. But now you should be able to get some consistency, which leads me to ask you this: so, what role do you think cannabis plays now, or should play in the daily life of people? Is it recreation? Is it wellness? Is it lifestyle? What is it what role do you think cannabis should be playing now for people?
It's hard to say because, I have friends. I have a coworker at the dispensary, our general manager, who used to smoke weed all the time, and now it doesn't really agree with him. Similar to some people can't eat pizza as they get older and stuff. So it's hard. And then in the same vein, it's like people should use it for recreation. People who want to use it for recreation. People that can use it for pain management that they find themselves, inflammation, rest, sleep. There's so many uses for the plant. It's hard to pinpoint one thing people should be using it for. I think people should be using it on an individual basis on what works for them. There's just so many things that this plant can do that you can't really put it in a box or say this is what people should be using it for. We should use it for all of its benefits, and it might work for you for one thing and it might not work for the other, but it helps. It's proven to help people for a myriad of things.
Right, and cannabis is a big buffet, and people have to have an opportunity to pick from it what works for them. And again, just got back from a conference in Iceland on medical cannabis, where the majority of the conversation was about feminine health, about menstrual health, about menopause. And so as you say, people have to use it for whatever works for them and find it. So do you think there is a better way now with the legal market to guide people to the use and the purpose that they are looking for?
I do. And one factor to that, and I guess another change kind of from that legacy market to now, is there's real labs involved. There's real people involved who are making perfectly dosed items, edible items, tinctures, non-smokables, which is an entryway people can have into cannabis that wasn't really there before. The biggest thing whenever there's someone new at our dispensary, or, my mom, who was a school teacher for 30 years, looking to try cannabis, and, she'd never wanted me to try cannabis, but now that it's, my livelihood, she's more open to it. And the barrier is as much as just taking half a bite of a corner of a gummy and seeing what that does. It's having that half a glass of wine, for the alcohol comparison, and going from there. Because I do think that, we're in a world where a lot of people are moving away from alcohol. That's what I did before, was a bartender and ran bars. And I think people see the ugliness from it. They see there's really no health benefits from alcohol. I mean, like one glass of wine maybe, but that edible entryway, that low dose, try it, see if you like it, see if it works for you, see which of these benefits from cannabis and cannabinoids helps you, and go from there. Because there's a whole myriad of people who don't want to get messed up from cannabis and aren't looking for the heaviest rosin hit and aren't looking for 100 milligram edibles to rot on the couch.
Right.
And I mean, we're seeing that and, doing things for it. It's taking different adaptogens. It's putting a little caffeine in a gummy so someone can start their day. It's putting, natural sleep aids into gummies to help people sleep at night. We have gummies with green tea extract in them to just kind of help you throughout your day. So there is a huge sect of people who aren't smoking weed to, be Snoop Dogg or Bob Marley or Willie Nelson. That's an evolving thing, I think, from the legal market.
Right. And in hearing what you're saying, alcohol is a one-trick drug, whereas cannabis is like a buffet that you can pick from what you're looking for. Just as you aptly pointed out, the green tea, a little caffeine, you can add, you can manage, and people have a lot more options when we're looking at cannabis than what we did with alcohol. Because you're basically just taking in the alcohol and you're putting in other flavors to dull the flavor of alcohol. But as we know now with metrics, you have terpenes you can talk about, you have multiple cannabinoids, minor, major cannabinoids, which is actually leads me to the next question that I was going to ask you. So, and originally I had the 80s. I had written down the 80s and I'm going, I don't think James was really...
No, 90.
I was going to say, yeah. So if we say 2000, the cannabis in the year 2000 was often CBD rich. So this is what I'm hearing from people in the legacy market that have been in the legacy market. CBD rich and more balanced. But today's market is more sort of THC driven. Do you think that shift has hurt or helped? Or what's your take on that?
I think it's hard for me to speak on CBD being in the weed I was smoking in the 2000s, just because I knew really nothing about the plant other than, there's some purple on the leaves, it got here on time. But one thing I knew that's changed with this potency chasing and chasing that elusive 31% flower to sell for the highest price, we are losing out on better weed because of it. Because right now in our state, there's 7 stores that can sell, but there's about 50 to 60 active cultivators. And if those cultivators only have 7 avenues to sell their weed, you want to grow the one you could sell for the most, and you want to grow the one that retailer can, sell for the highest price. So, there's strains, and you brought up earlier those legacy strains, the Acapulco Gold, the Maui Wowie, Northern Lights, and that's what we get, 40 and 50-year-olds coming in. Why aren't you growing sour diesel? It's because the THC numbers on those, older landrace strains that haven't been hybridized yet or crossed, they were testing low. I mean, they were testing anywhere from 10, 12, as low as, you could see Maui Wowie test at like 2-3%. And in the current market, or at least the market as it's been since it's been legal in a lot of states, that just hasn't sold.
Right.
So, I mean, some of the best weed we have grown as a cultivator, we had to stop growing because it tested so low. It might look the best, it might smell the best, it might smoke the best, but if it's a 15% strain against a 30% strain, cultivators are stuck having to grow that 30%er that might be worse weed. So, I mean, that's the biggest thing. And when you were talking about alcohol earlier, as much as there's so much more of a choice in cannabis, not really in the consumer's head because there's no nationwide brands. There's no, oh, here's whiskey that makes me feel this way. Here's rum that makes me feel this way. I know if I have a couple glasses of red wine, I feel sleepy. If I drink vodka, I become mean. Like, the public has decades and decades of this kind of categorization of alcohol where all weed really has is sativa, indica, and the THC number, when there's just so many more factors that go into the plant. And when you say terpenes, I wish that people could look at linalool and say, oh, this is what it does for me, when, like, the same way I look at rum and, like, that's a happy drunk, a vacate. So it's almost like we're striving to get to where the alcohol field is, in a sense, where there's just so much knowledge, basic knowledge in consumers about it, where it is such a limited knowledge base on cannabis. I mean, I would venture to say 80 to 85% of our customers might not know the word terpene. I didn't before I entered the legal field. So, I mean, I think that's what we're working against, is just kind of a base knowledge of that high number, and does it make me more awake or more sleepy?
Right, and so there's a lot to chew on in what you just said. We do not have generally access to information. Even the certificate of analysis is not always present, and we're trying to explore what information consumers are actually interested in, because you can make the information available and they still won't read it. But I wanted to ask you, how important are terpenes? Now that you brought them up, let's talk about terpenes for a minute. Absolutely. How important are terpenes and compared to cannabinoids, and how do you see them shaping the quality and the effect?
I mean, I think with anything, cannabis always talks about the entourage effect, and I do think that's true. I don't think if you just had a plant, when you saw the COA breakdown and there was no THC, no CBN or CBG, CBD, and it was just terpenes, that it would do anything. You find terpenes like carophyllene in black pepper, and that's like the taste you get. Linalool is like the lavender flavor. Limonene is like a citrusy one. So terpenes exist in almost every food or plant that we ingest. And I mean, I do think, and I've seen studies that terpenes do, can affect intoxication for a bit, but at the end of the day, I'm not the process isn't exactly just like we say with the THC number, how intoxicated am I going to get? So I think terpenes matter the most in terms of finding your favorite flower, opening that bag and saying, oh, that's the smell that I like. And then you smoke it, and that's the effect that I like of what comes with it. Because in reality, the cannabis culture, it's not all about getting high. A lot of it's kind of like a beauty pageant. It's like the swimsuit edition. What do you look like? What's your answer for getting, how you feel? Does it make you do this? Does it smoke good? Are the nugs pretty? So there's so many factors that go into it to every consumer. I think the terpenes that's what differentiates it from a whiskey to a rum. It's the terpenes are the difference in the flower.
Right, and perhaps we need to start to talk about the terpenes and minor cannabinoids, like we discuss terroir and the body of wine. When we're describing a Malbec as opposed to a Pinot Noir, you talk about maybe the body, the thickness, the yummy, whatever. And if we could develop a conversation around cannabis, that would be similar. That might simplify things for consumers who are looking for specific effects or specific outcomes.
Exactly. But to what you said before, how easy is it to teach the consumers? Like, it's kind of daunting to enter that space and talk about terpenes, because every dispensary I've ever gone to, is a chart with 16 different terpenes and so many scientific words you've never heard before, and flow charts to feelings, and a lot of, and if dispensaries are the only places talking about it, and at the end of the day it's a consumer retail transaction where they want to go in, get what they're buying, and come out, it's hard for a dispensary to put focus on education where people aren't coming to class for at these dispensaries, and it's kind of a headache once you read all 16 terpene. I mean, I couldn't list the 20 terpenes to you right now because it sounds like you're reading the periodic table. So it's
right.
It's easy to say sativa, indica, and look at a number because it's easy to digest, but it doesn't help us at all.
Right, but we know now that reading the cultivar or understanding what's in the flower itself, what the composition of terpenes and cannabinoids is actually going to be indicative of what you may expect as a feeling, as an outcome.
100%.
And I think we can start to try to focus on how do we package up that information and give it to the consumer so they can determine for themselves whether they like a Malbec or they like a Pinot Noir, whether they like this cultivar over that cultivar.
Without a doubt, but it's also a strange thing, and I mean it's the easiest thing for me to harken back to. But with alcohol, there's people that like gin, and there's people that don't like gin, and there's people that gin's their drink and gin's not. So it's hard, I think, in such cannabis, legal cannabis is really in its infancy to say, oh, this does this, and here are its amazing effects, because it is, it's a generalization of a product. So, for one person, you could say this indica, it should make you sleepy, but we've had a strain, Mandarin Sunset, that makes some people wired and puts some people to bed. Now, there's, generalizations that are probably true with them, and I think it is important to say, here's the energized terpenes, here's the relaxed terpenes. But, it's I think it needs to be simplified a little more to what you're saying, because, it's not something that's easily digested.
Right, and there's another element here. If we continue to compare it to liquor, you can do a wine tasting where you try 6 varietals and you try a small sip, and you've managed those before. We can't really do that with cannabis. Here's 6 gummies we want you to try.
For sure, and that's the tough part, even with like R&D or quality control, or here's a new strain. I mean, we give someone at our grow a new strain to try for quality control, and they might be like, oh, it was good, but I did eat an edible earlier that day, or I smoked a joint before you gave me that. And like you said, there's no palate cleanser for weed. If you take a bong hit, you're probably going to be high for a little bit, and you can't really go through the next 2 to 3 things and see what works for you. That's the biggest thing why I think edibles are the best form of entry to anybody that's just looking to try cannabis, because we have a brand called Lights Out, which is just specifically for sleep. And what we do there, we take a bunch of CBN and CBG and CBD, and we load the gummy with those other, non-psychoactive cannabinoids, not the THC. And it's proven to help people. And it was in a meeting today. It's our biggest seller by far because it works. Now, Does that allow someone to say, oh, CBN puts me to sleep? Now I want to look for CBN-rich flower. That should be the natural kind of next steps if you found CBN works. It's probably about finding that in other edibles, the thing that makes you lively, and the thing that makes you relaxed, the thing that doesn't give you anxiety are the cannabinoids you should be looking for. But, it's...
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, I've got one more question for you.
Yeah.
So if you could reset consumer priorities, and we've talked about high THC being the one metric that we have. If you could reset consumer priorities, what would you want people to look for when they're coming in to choose cannabis?
I mean, it's a good question. Realistically, I mean, I think it's a perfect world, but I'd want people to, and if we're just, specifically talking flower and pre-rolls, is to not look at numbers and find the strain that you like the most. I mean, that's the beauty of cannabis is, it gets a little ridiculous sometimes looking at all the names of, Maui Wowie and Durban Poison and Sweet Insanity and Cotton Candy. There's just so many different variations of this plant that you should try them all, and you shouldn't let a number dictate you. And then when you find those, because you'll see, I mean, even our head grower, he knows, I mean, his life is cannabis. He's been growing weed in Rhode Island for 20 years. I was going to say 30. I don't want to date him, but it might be 30. And he knows the terpenes he likes, and he knows that if he smokes that, he likes it. So smoke a bunch of different strains and then look into those strains. Ask for the COAs. Look at the terpenes, because you can kind of curate what you like yourself instead of being a slave to what at some points is an arbitrary number.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well. Thank you for that. So the last thing that I want to do. So I tried to bust a myth with people on that come on. So the myth that I wanted to talk, the higher the THC, the better the cannabis. So
yeah.
What's your thought on that?
I think it's wrong. I've heard some people say the brain can only take 18%, whatever. I mean, I've smoked 30% weed and have gotten very, very stoned. But I've smoked 15% weed and have gotten even more stoned. So no, and I mean, and for us, and if you ask a lot of cultivators, growing 30% weed, to send to the lab testing, which is also what I think is the best part about legal weed, is not the lab testing for the numbers. It's the lab testing for microbials and fungus, and what's going into your lungs is makes it healthy. So that lab does both things. It tests for all the pesticides, the metals, and anything you don't want to be ingesting, but it also tests for that number. And I mean, the weed that tests 30% a lot of the times is long, spindly, not winning the beauty pageant we discussed earlier. There's not big, beautiful nugs. It's smaller, harder to trim. There's more trichomes on it, so it might test a little higher at 30, but I mean, I'd rather a nice, beautiful nug at 20% over a 30%er all the time.
Right.
No one, and back to the alcohol, no one walks into the store, the liquor store, and says, I want Everclear because that's the highest alcohol percentage. No one's ever willingly drank Everclear. So that's the same thing with THC. It's like, oh, there's a 40% weed. It's like it's probably not what's going to taste the best, and it's probably not going to give you the best outcome. Just like drinking a glass of Everclear wouldn't taste the best or give you the best outcome.
Exactly. All right. Well, listen, thank you so much for answering my questions and sharing your legacy background. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, man.
Key takeaway. Cannabis quality isn't measured by THC percentages alone. The shift from CBD-rich flower to THC-forward products shows how consumer focus has narrowed, but terpene balance and experience are the real future of cannabis. James Moran's journey shows us the tension between legacy wisdom and regulated reality. His opinions highlight why cannabis needs to move beyond numbers and back towards what truly matters: experience, balance, and trust. Thanks for joining me on Guided by Wellness. James Moran's perspective bridges the past and future of cannabis by remembering the lessons of the legacy market and embracing terpenes, balance, and consumer education. We can build an industry that serves people better than ever before. Next time, we'll look at how dispensaries can help guide consumers past potency and towards intentional cannabis choices. Do you think cannabis has gotten better or worse since legalization? Share your thoughts and let's spark a conversation about what matters most in cannabis today.
Thanks for watching Guided by Wellness. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.